When language in common use in any country becomes irregular and depraved, it is followed by their ruin and degradation. John Milton, English poet, polemist, and civil servant. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. For tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. And yes, it is definitely early for me because I stayed up late last night doing a show. Go check that out if you haven't seen it. I reviewed that Jubilee video that's going around. Primarily the guy Connor that allegedly was fired after declaring he was a fascist and kind of willfully accepting the Nazi designation and not repudiating the idea of accepting Nazi ideas. I mean, it was pretty rough, and it was a long episode. I'm going to go back in a few minutes today, and I will kind of add some chapters to it so you can kind of skip around because it was quite long. It was 2 hours, but I think it's worth your time. All right, today, what do we got? Well, I'm going to do a shorter show, and it definitely will be a shorter show. I know I say that sometimes, and I don't really mean it. Today will be a shorter show because I have an early morning appointment that I have to get to. But I wanted to make sure that I at least give you guys a show. So, what are we talking about today? Okay, so I see this argument happen all the time. A lot of people will say, "Oh, in Israel, the response that Israel's, has to Palestine, what they're doing, it's a genocide." And then the people on the other side, they'll counter, however they will. And so I wanted to add a few thoughts to both sides. Because if you guys know me, I like criticizing both sides of any argument. It's just my thing. And I think I'm pretty good at it, actually. So I don't actually like using the term genocide. I don't think it's fitting. It may be well-intentioned by some people, but well-intentioned doesn't mean it's correct. I like correct arguments, not for the sake of being correct, but for the sake of communicating an idea well and being able to convince somebody else of your ideas. You can't do that if you're giving sloppy arguments. So let's clear that up. So here's how let's see what happens. Let's do this. Let's start off by excuse me. Let's talk about what it is. Like, what's the standard definition of genocide? Because this is a term that has a very specific definition. And when there's a term that has a very specific definition, and that definition has very clear examples, and most people tend to agree with it, that's the one you should use. Now, if there are terms that there are sometimes terms that maybe they change over time, or maybe there's some ambiguity. That's a different story. But this one is not. So here we are. This is the actual definition. I'm going to read it in case you can't see it. Maybe you're watching from your mobile phone. From Article 2 of the Genocide Convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So, what a lot of people do is they'll say, well, in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, a lot of people will claim that Israel's response to actions by Hamas as of lately, October 7th, amount to a genocide. Now, that could be well intentioned, but it doesn't really fit this definition. Okay. Now, some of the elements here would be correct. So, for instance, you've got killing members of the group. Okay. Well, that does happen. Okay. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Okay. That kind of happens. I mean, and that's a natural byproduct of any conflict, right? Like if you're at war with somebody, if one group of people, one nation is at war with another, then by virtue of dropping bombs, you're going to cause serious bodily harm and mental harm. I mean, just imagine if a bomb was dropping. I live in Jacksonville. Imagine if and Jacksonville is quite large, largest city by area in the United States. And so if you imagine, I live on the southern portion of it. So if you imagine that the northern portion is getting bombed, I would probably have some mental something going on, because I'm like, man, it's like in my neighborhood, in my backyard almost, right? But that would be that's a natural byproduct. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Okay, so this one is a bit vague, right? Like if you, and in particular in this conflict, because you kind of have two groups in a sense. You have Palestinians, and then you have this subgroup, Hamas. Okay, and they are somewhat different. Hamas are Palestinians. Palestinians aren't necessarily Hamas. Thus, Hamas would be a subgroup. Okay. And if the idea is like, hey, we're going to kill Hamas, but in the process, we're killing Palestinians as well. Oops. Okay. And that's the attitude that's taken. And in some cases, it's actually even worse. I mean, you've got people like Congressman Randy Fine, who's like, I hate Gazans, kill them all. And he literally says that. I'm not even exaggerating, but he's a monster, and that's topic for a different day. Imposing measures to intended to prevent births within the group. But this one's where it actually explicitly does not apply, because the counterpoint kind of relies on D, and then forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's not happening either. Now, it says any of the following acts. Okay. But there's a little bit of ambiguity because, like, again, killing members of the group. Well, if you're at war with a group and you're killing some of them, and then you're, going after, like in this particular case, Hamas, well, you are killing members of the group, but like there is some justification there. And when I say justification, I mean justification for killing Hamas. So if you're like, look, and I have said, if you want to go after and kill Hamas, fine. I have no problem with that. Kill them all. Hamas is a clear terror group. There's no argument there, I don't think. And as far as I'm concerned, the actions that they have taken, particularly in the most recent one, October 7th, which was horrific, they went over and they slaughtered like 1,200 people, just out of nowhere. Like there's not a response necessarily, and the people they killed weren't combatants, right? So it wasn't a military response of any kind. It was outright terrorism, right? Or you can call it mass murder. There's plenty of There's plenty of words that you can use to describe what Hamas did. Any one of them should basically give the impression it was vile, whatever term you choose to use. Okay. But now Israel is responding, and a lot of people aren't a big fan of how they're responding because at first, I think most people were like, okay, you got to kill Hamas, fine. But then after a while, we're like, wait a minute, tens of thousands of people are being killed. This is like you're going a bit far. And that's where I am. That I've got friends who started out and they were like on the side of Israel. And then now they're like, "Ah, you guys are going a bit far. You're killing a lot of innocent civilians. And I'm not even sure how many Hamas you've actually killed." And I think so this needs to be addressed. Now, here's where the arg so I think the term genocide doesn't work. Okay. And we're going to get more into that. Let's look at the counter response though, because the counter response is actually kind of interesting. So this is one, and let me get it up on the screen here. Let me move a couple things around here. Gotta switch some stuff up on the screen so that it all works. And I saw this just yesterday. So here on the screen we see a meme, and somebody had said, "Oh, look, it shows the guy in the pool waving the flag of Palestine, saying genocide, genocide." And then in the next scene down below it, it shows like it kind of pans back and it shows that the man is sitting on the ground in the water, so the water is like very shallow. And then it says Gaza population increased by 2.02% or 43,000 people since October 7th. And so this is where that argument starts to break down, because at the end of the day, what you have is you have this idea, like one of the elements was, hey, you're preventing births. But in this particular case, it can be shown that Palestine had an increase in births. So, it was D, if you remember, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Well, their measures aren't necessarily preventing births, clearly, okay, because their population has risen. So, in terms of a counter response to the term genocide, this would be accurate. Now, what I don't like about it is that a lot of people make it in a very snarky way, kind of like dismissing the whole idea that there is still a problem. Even though your argument may be well intentioned, it could be wrong. And it opens the door for people to respond like that. However, there is another side to this, because in this debate, if you think of it in terms of people defending the Palestinian people defending Israel's actions, people who defend Israel's actions, they will often claim that Hamas is trying to exterminate them. They'll point to documents and they'll say, oh, in this document, they want to exterminate us. They've said they want to exterminate us for years and years and years, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not trying to demean that. Okay. I'm just saying, like, when I say blah, 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 I just mean like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera is probably a better way to phrase that. And so the same argument applies there. So I want to show you something. Okay. Let me show you this. Let me pull this up on the screen. Boop, 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 boop. And I gotta move some things around a little bit. I'm moving some images around to make it so it makes sense. So this comes from the Jewish Virtual Library. Okay. Now this is my graphic. I made the graphic, but I used the information from the Jewish Virtual Library. So here it is. So if the argument is you cannot use the term genocide to talk about what's happening in Palestine because of their increasing population, then the same argument applies to Israel. And supporters of Israel need to reconcile that they cannot claim, oh, they're trying to exterminate us, when in fact their population has went up. And you may have trouble seeing this, and I apologize. In the future, I'm going to work on making sure that graphics are more visible, especially if you're on a phone. But what it shows is this shows, and I'll take me out of the picture here just so that you can see it, or maybe I'll just make me really small. That way I can stay on the screen here. So let me do that. Where did I go here? Let's make me a little bit smaller and put me right there. Okay, perfect. All right. So now what we have is This is showing the population of growth of Israel from 1948 all the way to 2024. I think technically it's 2025. Made a mistake there, and you can see that at the founding of Israel, we're at like just around 1 million people, and currently they're at about 10 million people. So in this, in this time frame, and we can see from the graph that there has been a nice steady increase in the population from 1948 till now. And so if the argument is, oh, they're trying to exterminate us, they're sure as hell not doing a very good job. So if you are pro Israel and you're arguing that genocide is an inappropriate term because of the population growth, check the population growth of Israel. Check your own argument, because it also applies. Even if you're not using the term genocide, if you're trying to say, and I don't think I've heard people that are on the pro-Israel side say, oh, they're trying to, genocide us. I mean, maybe they do, and I just haven't seen it. Usually it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's like, they want to exterminate us. Okay, people could want a lot of things, but they're not. Okay? And so whatever applies to Palestine in this argument applies to the other side. And we can see it right here. These aren't my numbers. I didn't make them up. I didn't go find some pro-Palestine group that's got these numbers. I found a pro-Israel group that said, here are the numbers for their population. And they are increasing. And that's actually a good thing. I think it's good. I think any country should have population growth. That's a positive. Okay. But at the end of the day, here's the thing. If you, whatever side you're on, if you want the other side to hear you, we need to have good arguments. Now, I want to go back to this genocide thing. And I'm going to be, I've got a bunch of notes here that I'm going to be looking at. The problem with the word genocide is not only that it doesn't really fit so well, but it also doesn't fit when we look at historical context. So again, I said at the very beginning that genocide is a very specific term, and there are specific historical uses where pretty much everybody agrees. So let's talk about some of those. Okay. The Holocaust is one, and there's no particular order. I've just got my notes here. All right. Why was it considered a genocide? Well, it was an industrial scale killing, explicit intent documented in Nazi policies. So like the final solution, they targeted entire groups regardless of individual actions. They had concentration camps like Auschwitz that were literally designed for extermination. We have evidence of intent. So you got Nazi leaders, including Hitler and Himmler, explicitly outlining plans to eradicate Jews. And we see these in the Wannsee Conference protocols. Okay, so there is evidence, yes, that they wanted to exterminate this group of people. We don't really have that level of evidence on Israel's side. Now, you could argue and you could say, well, they're being more clever about it. They're doing it under the guise of killing Hamas. Okay, that's a second argument. That's a second claim, because now you have two claims that you have to manage. You have the first claim is, hey, they're committing a genocide. So now you got to reconcile it with the actual definition and historical context or historical examples that operate off that definition and are widely accepted as fitting that definition. So that's kind of an uphill battle already. Then you would have the claim, oh, well, they are trying to do that, for which you have to meet although you have to deal with those. Then you would have to deal with, okay, now they're doing it in this clandestine manner. So now you got to demonstrate that. And if you can't demonstrate that, well, then guess what? Now you have two claims that you have failed on, because the first claim relies on the second claim being true. So let me rephrase that so it makes very clear sense. The claim that it's a genocide, if you're falling back on there's some clandestine effort, then that claim of genocide relies on you being able to demonstrate that the claim of they're doing it kind of secretly, or they're doing it in a way so that it obscures their intent, You have to prove that. And if you can't prove that, your first claim fails. Okay. And this is important, not for the sake of argument. Okay. Let's get this out of our head. It's not about winning an argument. It is about saving people. Like, I'm anti-war. My goal is less death, less destruction. And you have to ask yourself, what are you willing to do to achieve that? And since we're arguing, you know, then then you should be willing to modify your argument when it's shown that it's not strong, when it's shown to be a weak argument or an argument that you have not demonstrated. You need to be willing to adjust. And I'll say this, if you previously have said, hey, that's a genocide, and then somebody pointed out and said, yeah, it's not really an accurate way of describing this, here are some problems with the term genocide, it's okay to acknowledge that and say, you know what, you're right, I've been using the wrong term. And so therefore, I'm going to adjust my argument because I still see a problem here. You know, it'd be like, imagine if I'm arguing with my wife and I'm just like, I'm like, hey, you don't give me enough credit for all the work that I do around the house, you know? But imagine what I said is, you never give me any credit for what I do around. And then she might be like, bro, I just gave you credit yesterday. I mean, my wife wouldn't call me bro, but she might say, I gave you credit yesterday. What are you talking about? Okay, well, she just showed where my argument is not a good argument. Now, if fundamentally my argument is sound, like I have a real grievance, then I have to, if I want her to hear me, if I want her to take a step back and go, okay, I see what you're saying, I need to be willing to adjust my argument. So I might say, okay, well, you're right. Never is a poor term to use. What I mean to say is, it doesn't happen enough. I feel like I do more around the house than credit that I get. And I would like to, feel, more valued by getting more credit. Okay. So now I'm adjusting my argument, in light of being shown that the initial argument wasn't so good. So you can do two things. You can fight to keep your argument, which means you're arguing for the sake of argument, or you can argue for the greater good and say, I need to adjust, I need to adapt when, part of my argument may not be working out so well. Okay, so let's look at some other instances of genocide. Rwanda. Okay. I don't know anybody that's ever said Rwanda wasn't a genocide. And this is where the Hutu extremists, they killed approximately 800,000 to somewhere between 800,000 to 1,000,000 Tutsi and some moderate Hutus as well. Okay. They used machetes, firearms, and they massacred people in churches and in schools. It was vile, absolutely horrid. Right. Okay. So what's the evidence of intent? Well, the government directives, the RTLM radio broadcast that explicitly called for the extermination of the Tutsis. They called them cockroaches and all this other thing, all these other terms, and they were very, very clear about it. There was also this rapid, organized slaughter that was organized by Hutu-led government and militias. Radio propaganda, like I said a moment ago, that was inciting violence. I mean, all this evidence was there, and so it was very, very clear, and nobody disputes it. Because we look at it and we say, okay, yeah, you literally wanted to wipe out this people and you made no bones about it. So when we compare Rwanda to the Middle East, it doesn't really match. Okay. What about, I'm going to see if I say this correctly this early in the morning. Srebrenica massacre in 1995. This is in Bosnia. Okay. Serb forces, they killed about 8,000 Bosniak men and boys, and even in UN designated safe areas. This was during the Bosnian War. That one was brutal. They had the systematic execution of males. There were mass graves. There was expulsion of women and children. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia classified it as a genocide, and pretty much everybody agrees. Like, nobody argues with that because of what happened and how it happened. There was also orders from Bosnian Serb leaders like I'll never say this right, Ratko, and I can't even say the last name, to eliminate Bosniak men with deliberate planning to ethnically cleanse the area. Okay, so we can go back and we can look and we can say they were given orders to do a thing, and then they exterminated them. And there wasn't even the, hey, they attacked us and we're just trying to kill this subgroup who are vile people. That's not what happened. They were just like, kill them all. Here's a grave, here's a big hole, slaughter them and bury them. Okay? So we don't disagree on that because it fits the definition. It's not ambiguous in any sense. Cambodia, right? The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, they killed approximately 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians through executions, forced labor, starvation, and purges, targeting ethnic minorities, intellectuals, and religious groups. Okay. They had policies that were aimed at creating an agrarian utopia involving mass executions in the quote unquote killing fields and starvation through forced collectivization. Right. Like, so basically what all that really means is like they had very specific actions that were taken on very specific people. And their leadership explicitly targeted groups like Muslims and Vietnamese for elimination alongside what they called class enemies. So you had, you can go back and you can look and you can say, yep, this is a genocide based on what they did, what they said. You get the same thing for the Armenian genocide, right? Ottoman Empire killed about 1.5 million Armenians, massacres, death marches, starvation. This was during World War I, right? And so you had deportation and killing of Armenians. Entire communities were eradicated. This was recognized as genocide by many countries and scholars, although Turkey disputes the label. But and you can, like, just because you got one or two people disputing it, the more groups that look at it, more outside groups that look at an event and say this was a genocide, the more likely it is the case. It's not always a guarantee. Like, groups could be wrong. You could have 100 countries look and say, yeah, Israel's committing a genocide against Palestine. And just because there's 100 of them doesn't necessarily make them right. However, it is good evidence toward that fact. It's not always a guarantee, right? And so you have to be careful. But I think if we're operating off a a term that has a very specific definition, and then we can go back and we can look at other examples. And there are more. You've got let's see, you got the Guatemalan genocide, you've got East Timor, Darfur, right? There are genocides that occur that have occurred throughout history. And so we can look at those and use those as examples and then compare those examples to what's happening today. Now, again, if you're like, hey, again, if you're falling back on the argument of, okay, well, the way that Israel's doing it, they're just playing it safe. They're still trying to do it. Okay, you have to manage that claim. You have to prove that claim. And I would recommend that before you add another claim, you figure out how to prove one claim. So if you've got one claim, if you say, hey, they're committing a genocide, that's one claim. But then if somebody says, well, I dispute that, and then you go, oh yeah, well, this, and then you have a second claim. Number one, your claims should be independent. They should not rely on one another. Because if you have one claim that relies on another claim being true, then all somebody has to do is dispute that one claim, and then bam, they beat you on two of them. So again, this is not about arguments. This is about, in this particular case, saving lives. I want to reduce the number of deaths. I have no problem with people, with Israel, not people, with Israel taking out Hamas. I've said that before. Hamas is a terror group. They've done terrible, evil, vile things, and sometimes what they've done maybe is exaggerated. Sometimes people make it up. But even if you set those aside, they still have done evil, horrible things. And this, I think, helps you combat the whole, oh, you're just anti-Israel, you're anti-Zionist, and maybe that's not true. Maybe you are anti-Zionist, but if you're the kind of person that says, look, I just want killing to stop, of killing of innocent civilians, killing of women and children, well, then it's on you to work out your argument so that, one, it comes across as legitimate. But then number two, in the process, you are not easily subject to being, subject to some label. So like a lot of times people say, oh, you're just pro Hamas. That's a garbage argument. Like if, in fact, here's If somebody were to say, DL, you're just pro Hamas, or DL, you don't care about Jews, or DL, you want Israel, you don't want Israel to exist. To them, I would just simply,
of course, no, don't be ridiculous.
that's what I would say. I would be like, don't be ridiculous. And then I could follow it up and I would say, here's why you're being ridiculous. Number one, you know, my argument, I'm not saying genocide. Now, perhaps maybe early on, before I knew better, I might have used the word genocide a little bit more loosely. But then as I started investigating, I realized, okay, that's not really a good term. And so I moved away from it. Right. But that doesn't mean that my underlying concern wasn't legitimate. That just means I didn't have a good argument for it. And that happens all the time. I talked about it last night. People had arguments and they were bad arguments. And it's possible that underlying their bad arguments was a legitimate grievance or a legitimate concern. This happens all the time. It happens interpersonally with, between, let's say, a husband and wife. It happens between countries, between groups of people. I talked about it during the Nick Fuentes episode. I talked about how, a lot of people have fair grievances against the Black community. Now, the way they structure them and the way they present them, I think is poor, and they need to reevaluate. Part of poor in that particular case is that they are taking a stereotype and they're applying it too concretely, too firmly to all Black people. That's their big problem. Again, if you want people to hear you, work on your argument. Make sure that you are not making an argument for argument's sake. So hopefully that makes sense. And then, by the way, if somebody says, "Oh, well, it's not a genocide because they've had a population growth," just keep in your back pocket. Just say, "Okay, fair enough." Mind you, that you can't claim that Hamas, or well, maybe not Hamas, but you can't claim that Palestine, the group of people altogether, not just Hamas, but Palestinians and the subgroup of Hamas, you can't claim that they're necessarily eradicating Jews either, because as we saw, their population has grown as well. So if that argument is a good counter for genocide, it's also a good counter for your claims, even if you are not saying the word genocide. It goes both ways. If population growth suggests that a thing isn't happening, it applies everywhere. That's being consistent. All right, folks, I got to get out of here. I'm going to hit some comments here real quick, and then I'm going to head out. It's a shorter show today. Like I said, I've got a meeting I've got to get to. So hopefully all of that made sense. Let's see here. Let's see. John says there's many instances of genocide being used. It's overabused and cheapened when there isn't, and it's downplayed when there are actual textbook examples. I agree. And that's a point that I probably should have gotten to and I just missed. When you claim that something is a genocide and it's really not, and clearly not like there's a blurred line, but when it's clearly not, you actually diminish actual genocides. It's kind of like when people say, like if and I'm going to use this example, if a woman were to say, like, man, this guy tried to kiss me, he raped me. Okay, well, you're cheapening rape victims who were like assaulted and had, sexual violence committed against them. You're cheapening their experience by conflating your experience that was different, inappropriate still, wrong still, worthy of a punch in the mouth for sure, but you're still cheapening their experience by trying to conflate yours with theirs. And so I think we need to be very careful of doing that. Let's see here. Yeah. Randy, not so fine as a giant turd. Man, I do not like that guy. He may be for me, the most despised member of Congress. And he's in the district below me, I believe, here in Florida. Let's see what else we got. I thought I saw somebody new in the chat, and I was going to get to that. Starboy says, if you talk about intent, then Netanyahu's own cabinet. Right. And I'm not saying that you can't go back and look at intent and say, hey, there is an intent here. But again, that is a second argument, and you do have to prove that. And what I would personally do, and I think Dave Smith, who in the libertarian community, Dave Smith, Scott Horton, I think they do a very good job of it. They are the knowledgeable ones in our community who talk about this issue. I think they do a very good job of distinguishing these arguments and treating them as independent arguments. right? And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that Dave Smith actually opposes using the term genocide because it's ill-fitting. But he strongly opposes what's going on, what Israel is doing to Palestine on many levels, actually. But again, he treats the argument separately, so that's always a good thing. Let's see what else we got here. Comparing this to the what Netanyahu's doing right now. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. That might be a Oh, the concentration camp was the end product of Hitler's stupid ideology. If you look back at pre-World War II Germany, Hitler first conditioned the German population to see Jews as power-hungry people. Yes, and in some respect, that is happening today. Like a lot of people have this, this attitude, like, oh, the Jews, they're doing all these things. I don't think those are good arguments. And what happens, and I'm trying to bring this around to today's argument. What ends up happening is you give the pro-Israel side the argument, oh, you're doing what Hitler did, right? And so you have Hamas, and there are groups in the Middle East that would like to eradicate Jews, or at least really bring them down. Like maybe not eradicate them entirely. They might be able to make that argument and say we want to bring them down, or we just want to control the area. Although I think eradicate is probably accurate for some of those groups, right? You have some of those groups, and so you give power to the pro-Israel side, so they can go, well, you're doing what Hitler did, and if you're doing what Hitler did pre-World War II, then it's not a huge leap for them to say, where are you hoping to see this go? Are you hoping to see this go like where Hitler did? Okay, and that's, of course, this is where we have to be mindful of our arguments. We have to be careful, and we have to really focus on, I don't want to win an argument for the argument's sake. I want to stop the destruction and killing of people. That's what I want. And I will do whatever I can do. Like, there's nothing I can do internationally. I can't stop anybody from doing anything, but I can make better arguments and convince my fellow man that this is a better argument and that we should stop supporting certain actions, right? So I didn't have a problem with Israel responding to October 7th, but there was a point where I was like, whoa, y'all are overdoing this tremendously, very clearly. And I'm not a fan of this. Okay. So let's see what else we got in here. I mean, it's a fair argument. It's kind of separate. Netanyahu's power hungry and doing everything to just stay in power, regardless of the blood he has on his hands. I wouldn't disagree with that. Not quite the scope of this particular show, but I think there is evidence toward that. And I do think he's an evil person for many levels, on many levels, for many things that he's done that are documented. And again, perhaps he does want to eradicate all the Palestinians. I don't know. Okay, but again, that's its own distinct argument. So we've got to treat them separately. That Liberty Lady says, any feedback from the Jubilee strike on your YouTube? I don't think I actually got a strike. It looks like I went back and I looked, and it doesn't show a copyright strike. What I think happened was they said, hey, we're flagging this show and we're cutting out this portion. We're disabling this portion while you're showing something, and I'll have to go and try to hunt that down. But I don't think I actually got a strike, so we're good there. And then in the future, I will just blur out the videos so that they'll leave me alone. Michael, thank you for joining. If Palestine isn't suffering genocide, then neither did the Jews in World War II. Well, no, I think, again, if we're looking at the genocide, if we're looking back, if we're looking at the evidence, I think the evidence said that there was an intent to genocide them. Whereas I think it's not as clear that there's intent to genocide the Palestinians. But that doesn't mean that what's happening is right. That doesn't mean that Israel's doing the right thing. That doesn't mean they're not overdoing it. That just means this particular term is ill-fitted for this particular situation. And so we move away from using it. Because think of it this way. If I'm arguing with my wife, I'll use that. I like using that. If I'm arguing with my wife, and let's say I have a grievance, and I think she's being a bit snippy. And I'm like, God, you're being a bitch. Okay, which, by the way, I have never, ever in 12 years of marriage called my wife a bitch to her face or behind her back. Okay, it's not terms I use. But let's say I did. Guess what we're going to do now? We're going to argue about whether or not she's a bitch. We've moved away from my initial grievance. Now we're arguing the name calling. Okay, so we have to be careful when we use terms, what we say, because if we say, "Hey, it's a genocide," and then people argue whether or not it was a genocide, then what ends up happening is we're arguing about the definition of genocide while people are suffering and dying. So we're not helping. We've now distracted the argument to something else. Just in the same way, like if I thought my wife was being, unpleasant, and I might be better off by saying, "You seem to be in a bad mood today. You okay?" Right? Like that's far better than be like, "God, you're a bitch today." Right? And so now she might be like, she might take exception to being called a bitch. Nobody wants to be called that. And so she will argue with me. And so now we're not talking about, "Hey, you're in a bad mood today. What's up? Did you not get plenty of sleep last night? Do you need a little bit of, something from me? What is it?" You see how that works? So we have to be careful so that we can get to the core of the issue and resolve our differences or the conflict that's happening. This is why it's so important. So if we want to make progress between people, that's how we do it. And if that means using another term so that we're not arguing terms, then fine. I'm willing to do that because the innocent lives of Palestinian women and children is worth it. It's worth it to me to move away from the idea that it's genocide. And then if the killing stops, we can later revisit that and say, okay, now that there's no bombs going, now that we're not seeing bombs, exploding in hospitals and all this other stuff, now we can have an argument about what it was, right? First, deal with the issue. Stop the killing in this particular case. And if that means adjusting your argument, then do so. And then you can revisit it later. And that's okay. That's fine. Make sure that you focus on the mission, if you want to think of it that way. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to get out of here because I got to get to a meeting here in just a few minutes. Thank you. Tonight, I will be doing a premium show. So if you're not a Rumble Premium subscriber, you won't be able to watch it. Now, maybe I'll be nice and I'll throw a few minutes in there for people so that you could watch at least a couple of minutes. But I do have to do the Rumble Premium. It's just part of my requirements. So I'll be doing that. I will release some, maybe not all, but some of the premium stuff that I've been doing publicly later. Okay, so the stuff that's related to Mom Donnie, I'm going to release that either in part or in whole so that people can watch it. So just stay tuned for that. So if you're a Rumble Premium subscriber, check me out tonight, 7:30, and then we'll have a little bit of fun walking through Zoran Mamdani's platform, and I'll tackle it from a libertarian perspective. But with that being said, I'm going to head on out of here. I'll see you guys tonight if you're a Rumble Premium subscriber, or I will see you Tuesday morning. I will not be streaming tomorrow or Monday because I'm on vacation. So with that, have a good one. Have a great weekend. I'll see you whenever I see you.